Okay, the battle begins. We're talking about local search and business listening today, and about how you bring the best solution to marketers and what their needs are there and the different approaches. So first, I'm going to let these guys introduce themselves and establish the perspective that they're coming from, and then we'll go from there. So Wiley, if you want to start.
Sure. My name is Wiley Cerilli. I'm the CEO, was the CEO of SinglePlatform. And now I'm a vice president on the executive team of Constant Contact. We were acquired about a year ago. As far as this conversation goes, some of you have probably heard this before, but we feel like there's a big shift in the internet from the local space going from a listing directory to a discovery engine. People are going online not just to look up a specific business, but now they're using the web to discover new businesses. Google put out this stat that said that 50% of people, when they go online to look up a local service or product, they don't have a local business in mind. So 50% of the time they're thinking of a specific place, the other 50% of the time they're saying, I'm going to use the web to discover a local business. So what SinglePlatform does is we enable local businesses to publish all of the most relevant content, what they sell, so their products, their services, their menus, into SinglePlatform, and we publish it in real time across a publisher network of over 100 publishers, one of them being Yelp and TripAdvisor and Foursquare and Yellow Pages. So put it in one place and it goes everywhere. Mike was talking about it earlier. Sensi was a good example. People are looking for what the business sells, and that's what we do. So
Will, give us a little background on you.
So I'm Will Scott. I'm the CEO of a company called Search Influence. It's actually interesting that we would follow that last panel because we power digital agencies for traditional media companies. We work with newspapers and Yellow Pages publishers and some broadcast media to help them bring digital products to market on behalf of their advertisers. We started as an SMB-facing online marketing company, but I grew up actually building online Yellow Pages for a living, and so we had this problem that we have a hard time doing things that don't scale. And when we figured out that we had this kind of interesting combination of expertise in terms of local business marketing, along with a skill set in building scalable products, it led us to the conclusion that this was something that would scale better with partners. And so we've been working with, I think we're working with about a dozen traditional media companies right now, powering the online products that they're going to market with for the SMBs, and they're killing it. And I think my position relative to this stuff is that there's a lot of great products out there that take one piece or a couple of different pieces of this equation, but the challenge is that I think there's Kelsey data that says that the typical SMB is in 7.8 different marketing channels, right? I'm not sure what that 0.8 of a marketing channel is, but that's what the data says. So to me, I think that there's always going to be a need for companies like ours to kind of take those guys and hold their hand, and that's what we do.
Okay, great. And one of the things we were talking about backstage, just to draw a finer point on it, is this idea of all of the marketing services that are out there, and then which is the best way to do it? Do you want to be that sort of single point of contact for the local merchant and give them sort of everything they need? And then I guess it's, sort of what happens after that. So, Will, do you want to start us off with a little bit more of your thoughts on that? I know you have some very strong views on how that can go wrong.
Well, I'm going to try to keep some of my strongest views off the stage because
Come on.
I've been told that for certain audiences the F-bomb is not appropriate. But so I was asked before we came up here by David. The question is what makes you really mad? And so I think that one of my challenges, because we are both a platform and a service company, is that because we kind of built our platforms to support our service, we start from the position of what is in the best interests of that small business owner. And until a few weeks ago, when we got above 50 employees, I was still sort of categorically a small business owner, right? So the challenge is the challenges, I mean, there's so many challenges, right? But the main one is that a lot of the companies, those 20 calls a month that the SMBs are getting, they want the merchant to believe that all they have to do is sign up, check this box, fill in a little bit of information, and they're done, right? And that's it. We no longer have to, hey, you got that internet marketing thing handled, just keep writing us a check for $4.79 a month, and you'll be good to go. And that to me, is challenging. So, I'll use the example, and I just use them as an example. It's not, I know that there's a bunch of Yext folks here, but to me, one of the challenges is that if you look at the marketing of Yext, they're saying that they're going to manage all of these listings for you, but the reality is what they're doing is they're pushing an overlay out into the data feeds. And so yeah, on the surface, it absolutely looks like they got that local thing handled, but the reality is there's still a whole issue of duplication, changes of address, the many different places where that business might have been over time, which are not handled by that kind of solution. And so to me, that's where, in a nutshell, what's the problem? The problem is to say to a small merchant, hey, sign up with me, we got you covered, when it's really only oftentimes one piece of the equation.
Okay, I want to get back to that, a piece of that in a second, but I wanted to see if you had any thoughts on that, because I think you guys are coming from the standpoint, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, which is, we've got you covered. I mean, we're offering you all of these ways to get all of your information online, like a whole range to be up there. And then, do you think it's fair to characterize it like, not one and done, but we'll get you online and there you go?
Sure. So, I mean, we don't really have them covered. We have them covered for certain things, right? Single platform is different than Constant Contact. Single platform, it is just somewhat of a one and done for at least a little bit. They can put their products and services in. It's not like an overlay like Yext. It's a direct feed, and it's SEO optimized for the publishers. But it is more of a one and done. Maybe they update it, say, a few times a year. But for Constant Contact, they have 500,000 businesses. They're signing 45,000 businesses a month, and those businesses are logging into Constant Contact an average of 7 times a month. That's a lot of engagement with a big platform like Constant Contact, writing long emails and uploading lists, and so they're actually engaging with the Constant Contact platform a lot. There's a lot of companies trying to be the all-in-one service provider. That's impossible.
And this is part of the challenge of this street fight, right? Is that I have a lot of respect for the way that Constant Contact approaches this market. I mean, they don't stop touching, right? I mean, it's not the 7-touch rule, it's the 7 touches a day rule, right? So they're constantly trying to energize the merchant to use the platform to their benefit. So, I would contend that as a platform, if the rest of the services were there, and unfortunately what we've discovered is that as much as we might scale the software and scale some of the deliverables, you still got to kind of deploy the Russian army to hit this project, right? And so this is where the challenge lies, is that Constant Contact does a fantastic job with their tool set, with individuals out in the field in each of these markets that are kind of rallying. But it's still not, without an intent to grow an army, they're never going to be able to do all of the things that I think a service-based company would.
Okay, you guys don't have that Russian army either, though. Isn't that correct? But you don't need to.
It's more like a Ukrainian army, right? I mean, so one of the things that we do, and I think arguably better than a lot, is that a big piece of our software infrastructure is kind of a crowdsourcing platform. So while we have 54 people in-house, we've got another 70 who flex up to over 100 when we need them, particularly around content development, right? So this is the biggest challenge, and we, I'm so in love with the idea of native advertising. It just makes me really, really happy because I have 100 content creators that I can deploy any day of the week. So I think it's it's more of a part-time army. It's like if we went out into the streets and grabbed a bunch of conscripts and said, here, go fight in North Africa. That's what we're doing more than it is, deploying like a full-time.
Right. And meanwhile, you guys, I've been to your office. I went to your office just before you moved into your new, better office. And you've got a huge staff there, and talk about what those guys are doing.
Yeah, so we have a huge staff of salespeople. We just started another 20 yesterday. So they're making outbound calls, 100 plus calls a day. But again, like we're very different from a Constant Contact, although we're part of it. Because we're reaching out to these businesses, trying to sign them up. We get a credit card over the phone, whereas Constant Contact, there are 45,000 businesses that they're getting a month. Those are all places that are just going to their site and signing up for a free trial, and they convert about 15,000 of them to paid customers. So their salespeople are different than ours. They're calling on free trialers and then converting them to be paid customers. So it's a very different model, and the hope is that we can convert our sales model, single platforms, to Constant Contact, so we're not making just cold calls.
Okay, and so let's also talk about what you guys are hearing from local merchants, and sort of what is the end game in this in terms of fully meeting their needs and the ongoing relationships there. Wiley, give us your thoughts.
Sure. So I think one challenge the businesses are facing right now is that they don't have. Someone mentioned this earlier today, but there's not much of an ROI. Like we need to do a better job connecting the dots for these local businesses, showing you are putting money into the system, you're advertising, and here's the results of what's happening to your pockets. And I say that, yet it's still very difficult for us, single platform, to do that. It's difficult for Constant Contact to do that. We know if you throw a lot of things at it, their business is going to increase. But I think we as an industry need to do a better job of describing connecting the dots between the money that they're putting in and the money that's eventually going to their pockets. And let's see here. Yeah.
And sort of the end game in that, or there is no end game. It's just the services keep expanding, and I would want to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, so I'd say the great services, the services that do that best are the services like a seamless web, right, with a transaction, tie in the transaction, or an open table, or a ZocDoc. The closer you can get to that, the better. I think part of it is that if you can't do that, then you need to be able to tell the businesses that you need to be able to define up front when you sign a business on that they're winning with your system. Gail talks about how the fact that when they were calling on a lot of their canceling customers, they were canceling because the open rate of their emails was 30%. Now, we all know that 30% is like world-class for opening emails, but they didn't. So you need to define success early on when they come onto your system. So we do a much better job now of when a business signs up, we say, here's your success metrics, and we're pinging them every single week to let them know that they're winning through our system.
So, I mean, I think it's a really interesting challenge, is that if we're not able to close the loop in some way, then we're never able to answer the, what have you done for me lately question, right? I mean, because there's, the two most common small business questions are what's in it for me and what have you done for me lately, right? And so, part of the platform that we're iterating on right now has to do with that closing the loop. Can I tell where that lead came from? Can I tell what they did immediately prior to getting to my site? But it requires that we do have some level of direct contact with that business owner, with their website, which is a challenging thing to do at scale. So I do think that there's definitely ways that you can close the loop, and you can say this lead came from Yelp, this lead came from Facebook, this lead came from Google advertising, but without a high degree of interactivity with the advertiser, it's just never going to be seamless.
Okay, speaking of. The close the loop part really is fascinating, because I think that's kind of what everybody is trying to do, and that's where there definitely are different approaches. And that is the end game that everyone's going towards. And so part of that is, how do you get there, and also how are you making sure that some of this stuff is a little bit becoming commoditized, right? Some aspects of it. I mean, certainly the basic business information out there. So how do you make sure you don't get commoditized?
I think that the only way to not get commoditized is to demonstrate that you're part of the solution, right? To demonstrate that it's actually your thing that brought the lead versus the fact that you pushed them out through, UBL and Localese and Infogroup and Yext and whoever else, and sort of cleaned up listings and made them look good in the eyes of Google. I mean, so for us, it's always been, and this is why we originally, I mean, we're not software developers. I've got a 7-person development team, but our core thing is to deliver value to advertisers. And so for us, all of these iterations have been toward answering that question. And so I think you got to, if you're not able to ultimately say, this was us, we did this for you, then it's not going to stick.
So it sounds like it's more of a high-touch approach. Like if we're trying to compare and contrast here, than what you guys are doing. But what you just talked about was the constant contact, really, with customers.
How appropriate that name is.
I know, right? Yeah. But at the same time, I mean, what are your thoughts on you guys have a great software team, and that is kind of where you can, you automate things, and that's where it could become more of a commodity. And how do you avoid that?
Yeah, I mean, there's certain things that you can do for a business that just saves them time, that sets a certain baseline. Like, we've mentioned Yext a few times, but it is important. I mean, yes, businesses can go up and edit their telephone number and address across all these sites. So maybe you could say that could be easily commoditized, but however, like, they don't have a lot of time. So paying for that, I suggest Yext to a bunch of local businesses because I think it is helpful and it can save them time. But so there's a baseline of things that every business needs to be doing. And if they don't have time to do that, then that's fine. We sort of we are trying to build a business that's going to generate new business for them. And I think you'll start to see us getting closer and closer to that transaction to enable us to connect the dots there.
Well, I mean, and I think that, SinglePlatform is not of the type of a lot of these other businesses, right? And if you look at what they did first, they got menus online. This is an inherently people-intensive process, right? I mean, yeah, you can scan some of them. Yeah, you can have methodologies around QA. But it's interesting because it's a platform. But this is why I'm so interested by the connection with Constant Contact, is because when I've got those people in the field who are preaching the gospel of Constant Contact, and all I really need to do is get those business owners to come in and engage with their business data. It's a really interesting sort of point of leverage.
I think a good metric to look at when trying to compare different service providers for the local space is their attrition rate. There's a lot of big companies that sell expensive services to SMBs, and their attrition rate is like 20% a month. One of the reasons that we found Constant Contact so attractive is the fact that they have a 2% attrition rate. For local space, that's unbelievable. It means they're constantly providing and demonstrating value to local businesses, and I think it's a great question to ask almost every one of these panelists. What is your attrition rate for your services?
Well, and I think that the interesting thing when you have conversations with these companies that are doing all of this cold calling is that, their idea of how they're going to reduce churn is by lowering their price point. Right, it's not by adding value.
That's partly where you start getting into the commodity, right?
And that's the real challenge for me. I mean, is if you're racing to the bottom just so you can reduce churn instead of actually finding a way to demonstrate value to your customers, that's not a sustainable business, no matter how many times you go public.
The question of demonstrating the value to your customers comes up with everybody, and I mean, in this space, it's no different from anywhere else. I mean, of course you want to do that, and I guess it's 3 results is one way, but I hear that a lot, and it sort of becomes, I'm not over my head. I sort of glaze over sometimes when I hear that.
Well, I think you've got to find a way to break it down to leads, to something that is at a minimum a proxy for contacts from the kinds of clients we want. And I feel like every time I talk, I quote one of my favorite slogans from the Yellow Pages. We make phones ring and doors swing, right? I mean, so at the end of the day, when you look at what is the value proposition to that local advertiser, it's if their door isn't swinging and their phone isn't ringing, then they're not going to see the value. So you've got to at least get to some kind of approximate proxy for that behavior in order to deliver value. And it's not just based on results. It can't be, a click never bought anything, right? So if you can't actually tag, this is a customer who went through to a likelihood of transaction and they came from this medium, then it's not inherently valuable.
Right. Okay, I think we have one more topic that we can cover, which is I wanted to ask about mobile and see your different approaches there and how that's going to make a difference in what you're doing versus the rest of the market.
Mobile's huge, obviously. Let's see here. So for single platform, it's really interesting that we have over 50% of our traffic is actually coming from mobile devices now. So that's with Yellow Pages and all of our huge publishers, TripAdvisor and Yelp. 50% of the traffic is mobile now, and that changed some point over the last like 4 months, which is incredible. And then just one restaurant stat is that 60% of people that are looking at a restaurant menu online convert within an hour. So it means they're looking at their mobile devices, ready to make a transaction.
Okay, but are you doing anything, what's your approach that's different from the rest of the market so that, you're the right choice for everyone?
So what is our approach? So every time a business signs on for single platform, we create a mobilized website for them. So a lot of the majority of the businesses that sign up for single platform they have a website that's built in Flash and it's not SEO, so they get a free mobile site. That's the add-on that we have that say maybe other companies don't. Okay,
so it's just an additional feature or benefit that
but
they get.
Just by virtue of the fact that they're putting the product data out into the feed, right? I mean, I interact with single platform data on a weekly basis, right? Because I learned at the Kelsey show in Boston last year that if I went to Yelp and I looked at a menu on Yelp, that it was likely carrying their data. So, it saves you going through to the website or looking at some really crappy scanned version on Urban Spoon. I mean, it's really, so I think that the product, because it grew out of this inherently mobile experience around restaurants, is natively mobilized. But I think that I often say that there's nothing more local than my pocket, right? But if you look at the path to transaction, I think one of the data points that I've seen recently is that it's something like 90% of mobile searchers take action within an hour, whether that, and there may not be a transaction, it's
contacting the business or whatever. Okay, well that was helpful support of what Wiley's doing, and so so what about you guys in terms of your approach in terms of mobile? How are you doing something different versus the rest of the market?
We're thinking about it.
All right. Okay.
Right. I mean, but it's you
got to start somewhere.
Yeah. It's I would contend that a lot of folks aren't even thinking about mobile, right? And the reality is that the beauty of it is that you've got a very small screen size to work in. Right. So if you can be dominant in local on mobile, you can frickin' own it.
Right.
And I think that the whole thing is how do you think about that path to transaction or to some sort of, event that says I'm going to be closed at some point.
Right.
But the data, the data is unfreaking real. When you look at the growth of mobile, 2 years ago we were talking to clients and they were saying, "Hey, do I need a mobile website?" And we said, "Well, once your mobile traffic gets above say 10%, then we should start thinking about it." 2 years ago, it was below 10% across most of the sites that we were touching. Right. And now it's in the 35-40% range.
Right. It's really here. So that's about all the time we have. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And next up, I believe we have our break.